Hello everyone, Eloi here from Apollo Scooters. Today we're going to show you 3 different versions of the Apollo Phantom. The first one is the first prototype we ever received. The second one is the second one we received based on the feedback of the first one. And we have the final batch production that will be delivered to you if you pre-order it. You can expect the same quality. So the first component and one of the most important one is the tires. On the first unit, it was 10 by 2.5 inch tires, tubeless, with a light thread pattern. It's not really something that will give you a lot of grips. That's why we decided to upgrade it to this kind of pattern with much more narrow arrows. This will give you better traction, better grip on the road. One of the main difference between those two wheels is also the fact that the first one is tubeless. So yes, we did try tubeless for everyone who is asking. And the second one is with inner tube tires. You notice it right when you jump on those two scooters that it's much smoother with inner tube tires. They feel just much more comfy. And tubeless tires, they are just so hard and they are extremely difficult to replace when you have a flat tires. So yes, a point can be made that they're gonna be more resistant to puncture, but everyone ends up with flat tires, and when you're gonna have one, well, you're gonna really appreciate the fact that your rim can split in half, because with tubeless tires, you need to keep the air inside the tire like a car basically. You cannot split the rim to change it, so you need to put soap or lubricant to try to pass it over. You need at least 2 people to change it. It's just not fun to do. And for the comfort, the reparation of it, we decided to go with tube tires. And because we really like them, we decided to keep the same tire from the second batch to the final batch unit. So the second component are the motors, what is inside the tires. In the first unit, it was 800 watt with sensor motors. On the second unit, it's 1200 watt. It's much more torquier. You have better acceleration, more torque. Also the fact the whole thing about splitting the rim for the tires made it impossible for the first one. And we just thought that all the competition are 1000 watts, so we might as well upscale it to 1200 to be competitive. And you do really feel the difference between the two. Between the second and the third model, it's still the same motor. We just tweaked the color a little bit. So if you look at the second sample, it's both of the sides are silver and black. We kind of didn't really like that, so we decided to paint one side completely in black on the third version and keep the other side with a bit of silver to keep it more interesting. Another major improvement that was made from the first model to the second one is the heat sink on the motors. If you look at the first one, it's just all flat. This is not really good for heat dissipation. You need something to catch the air a little bit and dissipate it. If you look at the second version, we have a heat sink around it, and it's sticking out more to cool down with the wind. It's the exact same motor for the third version, except the little difference about the colors. The third really important component are the brakes. From the start, we decided to go with 160mm disc, and we kept the same one through all those iterations. The only difference that you can notice is the first one was really a crazy shape that could be quite dangerous for your finger. It was looking really cool, but just to make sure that our customer were safe, we decided to go with a more traditional round shape. And it's also, when you ride with your scooter, there's way less chance of getting branch or just debris in your disc, because with that star-shaped pattern, you can imagine that it's just taking everything on the road. So, and you can notice that between the second and the third one, it's the same brake disc. So the fourth component are the fenders. On electric scooter in general, the fenders are there only for decoration. They are not really built to absorb the splash. That's why you see so many aftermarket fenders or little upgrade that you can make to really stop the splash. So for us, on the Phantom, it was a priority. The fenders need to be functional. The first unit we received, They were great, but the support that hold them, the two little screws that you can see here, were not supported by anything on the other side. They are regular screws, so they were screwed in the plastic of the mudguard directly. As you can imagine, with the rattle of the road, this can become loose and it's just gonna fail within a couple of weeks. And once they fail, well, you cannot really put them back because the screw will have eaten all the plastic. So a really important change we made is putting bolt and nut on the other side instead of just screws. So that way you can really tight it tight and it won't become loose at all. The only difference between the second unit we received and the final production one is the length of the bracket. That was also another small tweak we had to do because of how large those tires are compared to the first production that were made. Because they are larger, they were rubbing a little bit inside the fenders. As you can imagine, it's annoying. We made it 5 millimeters longer to make sure it's clear from the tire and you won't hear anything. Some of you might be wondering why we put a bracket only on one side of the fenders. You may be concerned if it's going to be strong enough. Well, it is. We tried to break it. It's extremely strong. The bracket is thick enough to absorb all the rattles. It's a well-designed bracket. On the first unit, you'll notice that there's only one charging port. For us, it was really important to put two charging ports because this is the new standard, we think, in the industry. So between the first sample and the second one, this is the big difference, one charging port to two charging ports. The difference that you don't see between the second sample and the third one is we added fuse on the charging side on the battery pack. So if you crash with the scooter or if there's water going into the charging port and it blows, it won't damage the battery. The fuse will cut the current and make sure the battery stays safe. We also made sure that the kickstand bracket is sticking out a little bit. So if you crash with the scooter, it's the kickstand bracket that's going to absorb all the shock and your charging port should be intact. The next component that is often neglected by factories are the kickstand. Almost all the manufacturers put the kickstand directly on the frame and they just drill a hole and put the screw. With the Phantom, we made sure that there's an interchangeable bracket that is CNC extremely strong. So even if you crash, you damage it, it's going to be extremely easy to replace and the kickstand should never fall off the scooter with that bracket. The next part that needed to be improved is the suspension. On the first sample, you can see that they only use bolt and nut to hold the suspension in place. This is not good. As you can imagine, while the suspension is going to work up and down, the thread of the bolt is going to eat up all the inside of the suspension and even the spacers next to it. The spacers is actually the other thing that needed to be fixed. Those ones were too short, so the suspension was not working properly up and down. It was not aligned how it should be. On the second unit, it was already much better. They put bigger spacers to really align the suspension. They completely removed the bolt and nut and they put one solid metal shaft instead of those. And they actually added some bearing inside. It was still not perfect because the bearing were not sealed bearing. And there was some rust creating on those spacers because they are in metal. On the final production unit, they replaced those metal bushing by nylon bushing. They also added some sealed bearings. So you can imagine the suspension being behind the wheel. It's eating all the dust and the water, so you really need sealed bearing to make it last longer. They also changed the nut at the end of the middle shaft for a lock nut. So you now have a small thread with nylon that's going to prevent that nut from loosening with the vibration. Finally, the last thing we changed, you cannot see it from the outside, it's located inside the spring suspension. On the first unit we received, it was a plastic bushing that was ensuring the decontraction of the spring. We decided to replace this by rubber bushing, so when the spring is decontracting, it's much smoother on your feet. You won't feel the decontraction at all. The next part on the scooter is probably the one that took the most time to engineer. We knew that we had to make it perfect for this scooter. It's the folding mechanism. So let's look at the first sample. When you look at it, you can think that it looked great, but in reality there was multiple flaws to it. The first one is the frontal hook of the folding mechanism. It's too thin, and the tolerance are not tight enough to ensure that it's going to remain tight at all time. With the vibration, it was coming loose. And on top of that, the stem was not welded to the folding mechanism. So it was only one screw maintaining it in place. That was not great. As you can imagine, with only one screw, you don't have a fixed solid point. We needed to either add 2 other screws to make it super tight or to weld it in place. We decided to just weld it in place to save the hassle to the customer of having to always tighten those screws. On the second unit we received, you can already notice it looked much better. The front hook is thicker. The center screws is bigger. All the screws also match the color of the actual scooter, so you don't really notice them. And the stem is now welded in place. All that being said, you can notice that the screws are still sticking out, meaning that the CNC job was there, but not quite perfect. On the third unit we received, again, the hook is even more thick. It's sticking out now. You notice right away that all the screws are fully in. It's sleek, it's the right color, and even the plastic clamp that we put around it, you just feel it. It's much thicker and the quality is nicer. The biggest improvement we made on the third unit is about the folding pin safety. So basically now you need to remove that pin to be able to fold the scooter. That ensured that if for some reason you're riding, the plastic clamp is either breaking or you just forgot to put it, and on top of that, the latch is coming down, well, you still have a safety measure in place to guarantee that the scooter won't fold on you. The next crucial component in line is of course the direction. From the first unit, we had a problem with it while we're doing our test run. The main screw under it actually came loose. This is the main screw that holds the old direction in place. It came loose, the bearing got smashed because of it, so we know that we had to rework it. From the second unit, it's already much better. The factory applied a lot of Loctite on the screw, so it remained tight, and it worked. Now it's still working perfectly, it's extremely smooth, but there was still some improvement that needed to be done to be on top of the safety line. On the third unit, you can notice it right away. The whole direction principle changed. We added a screw in the middle here, so it's easier for you to replace this part if you ever need to. And we also added 2 grub screws on each side of the direction. Those grub screws will be tightened on the main screw to make sure it's never coming loose. The other important component still in that area is the stem of the scooter. As I mentioned during the folding mechanism explanation, the stem on the first model was not welded to the folding mechanism. That was creating some back and forth movement, and of course you do not want that on your scooter. So on the second sample, as you can see now, it was welded. It was better. On top of that, they changed the torque screws that was holding the handlebar and the bottom of the stem in place to Allen screws, so it's much more versatile for tools and even to find those screws aftermarket. They are black to match the rest of the scooter. It's 10 times better than the first sample, but still the welding job was not quite there. You can see some imperfection. This is where the third model really comes into play. You see the welding job is much more consistent. There's a little beautiful wave all around the stem. They added the logo this time on the stem, so you can see the nice Apollo branding from every point of view. The last thing we decided to improve about the stem was the double layer aluminum. If you look at the first sample, it's one layer of aluminum like any other electric scooters. We decided to up the game again and to shift to double layers aluminum. This is basically doubling the strength of the stem. It's now incredibly strong and it's withstanding crazy amount of pressure on it while we're testing it. The next component is something Apollo is well known for, their crazy deck design. The Phantom was not an exception. We went over and above with a crazy pattern that looked fantastic. As you can see, on the first sample we received, it was a hard plastic grip. That is because the mold for the silicone grip was just not open yet. So when we received the second sample, it was 100% silicone. It's looking beautiful. There was still something missing. It's the Apollo and the Phantom in white. When we received the third sample, everything was perfect. The groove of the silicone are even deeper, so that brings the pattern out even more, and the labeling of the Apollo and the Phantom are now white. For the silicone labeling, we decided to go with white silicone instead of paint, and this will last much longer. Still in the grip tape area, the other thing that needed to be fixed is the rear footrest underplate. In the footrest, you'll notice that there's a brake light. As you can imagine, a brake light requires a wire. On the first sample, the wire was getting pinched between the frame and the under plastic cover. Of course, that needed to be fixed. The way to fix that, we just make a channel for the wire to pass safely in the frame, and that was fixed from the second model. And on the third model, it's even cleaner, and you can see that the under plastic cover is really flush with the footrest. It looked professional. From the start, we knew that we had to do something special about the display on the Phantom. That's why we developed the X display. As you can see, it's an incredible display, but on the first sample, it was quite actually bad. The PCB was too far from the plastic casing. This was creating a lot of reflection from the sun, and the whole interface of the display was just quite not there yet. There was no special feature, there was no P mode setting. It was literally just a basic display that was not good enough. When we received the second sample, we were really pleasantly surprised. It had the whole interface about the P mode setting. The display was much closer to the actual plastic casing, so way less reflection. It was much more brighter and clear, but there was still some key feature that was missing, like something that indicate to you when you press on the turning signal, when your headlights are on, or even when you press your single and dual button. We want you to be able to see it on the display if you are in that mode. When we received the third model, it was incredible. Everything was there, the flashing, the headlight, the sports mode, everything is clear. If you press any button, you'll see it on the display now. Coming from a background of mechanician, I knew that I had to do something special about the repairability of the Phantom. This starts with easy plug connectors. If you look at the first sample, everything is hardwired to the controller directly. This means that if you want to change any component, you have to open the deck of the scooter, run the wire through the stem and get it out, and run the new one in the stem and reconnect it. It's a long process, and there is no reason why it should take that amount of time and to be that difficult. The factory that we're working with understood our concern, and they implement from the second unit an easy plug connector from the key ignition and the throttle. Those are actually the things that break the more often on a scooter, so we're glad to see that. But still, as you can imagine, it was still not enough for us to really claim that it's the most fixable scooter ever made. From the third unit, they also implement that easy waterproof connector at the display. It's good, but again, you can expect to see those connectors for every electrical component on the final production batch. We asked them to add those waterproof connectors on the brake sensors, on the mode button, on the module that controls the turning signal, the headlight, and the single dual motor button. You can expect those changes to be made on the unit that's going to ship out for the first production. Lastly, we made a change that might seem insignificant, but was actually much needed. It's about the hook on the scooter. As you know, when you fold the scooter, you have the option to bring out a little hook that is directly attached on the stem to fix the stem to the rear footrest to be able to lift the scooter by the stem when it's folded. The shorter hook was causing the screen to hit the footrest while you were traveling with the scooters. A simple fix to that was to make the hook about twice as long to really create a nice gap between the footrest and the screen of the display. So now when you fold your scooter, your screen is totally safe. There you have it, guys. Hopefully this video will shine a light on the lengthy process that we go through to make sure an electric scooter is ready to market. However, we do have one last thing to show you. We heard your feedback loud and clear about the old Toolkit, so with the Phantom, we decided to go all out. We are excited to show you our premium Toolkit that will be included with every pre-orders of the Phantom. So as you can see, this is a premium Toolkit compared to the competition. You have 2 inner tube, 2 set of brake pads, 8 Allen keys that will cover all the size of screws on the Phantom. You have Allen key bits to fit with a screw ratchet driver. You have an air pump and also an air valve extender. Hopefully this will show you how much Apollo cares about their customer, and hopefully this toolkit will rule them out.